Hello? Can everybody hear me? Yes? Okay, good evening. I want to welcome you to tonight's meeting. This is the second of 3 nights meetings that we're having for the boundary study for the Clarksburg Northwest Seneca Valley Boundary Study. I am Adrienne Karamihas. I am the Director of Capital Planning for Montgomery County Public Schools. So I'm just going to go through a couple of things, and then I am going to turn it over so that we can get to why everybody's here, which is a conversation about the boundary options. So first thing, I want to make sure if everybody has a pink sheet and an index card. The pink sheets, we ask that after the meeting, if you can fill them out, there's going to be a box at the top. If you can drop off the pink sheet, we would really appreciate it. The index card, we did this at the community meetings. We did it at our meeting last night at Clarksburg and worked really well. If you can put your questions on the pink sheet, on the index card and move them forward, send them forward. We'll have people walking around. You can just raise your hand and we'll grab the card from you. Once we are done going through the whole presentation, we will then go through the questions. So during the presentation, when we're going through the options, there won't be a question and answer period. We're going to wait till the end. So if everybody can hold their questions, write them down, give them to us, and then we'll go through those questions. Tonight with me, we have staff from the Division of Capital Planning. We have Debbie Schieffer, who is our senior planner, who will be going through the presentation. Robin O'Hara, who is our demographer, and Julie Morris, who is up in the top corner, is another planner in our office. Am I forgetting anything else? I don't think we are going to be respectful of time, so we're starting at 7. We're going to end promptly at 9. A couple of things online. So for those, is the website at the end of the presentation? Okay, so at the end of the presentation, we will show you the website. All of the options are on the website currently, along with frequently asked questions, the timelines, the schedule. We will have the presentation online. We'll also have a survey that we are working on as we speak that will be up probably by the end, will definitely be up by the end of the week. And that is your opportunity to give feedback on the options that were developed that you will see tonight. In addition to that, there will actually be an interactive map. And I think that that's already up. And what you can do is, for the most part, the options cover the entire boundary of, let's say, an elementary school, but there are some that are split. So you actually can go on the tool, you can put your address in, and it will pop up where you are in the service area. It'll give you roads and information, so it'll let you know exactly where you are. So that's on the website as well. I don't think anything else for the moment, so I am going to turn it over to Debbie to start the presentation. And again, thank you all for coming.
Good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me, first of all? Great. Okay. It's going to take some time. We've got 8 options to review. Hopefully, I see some of you brought copies of the options with you, which were posted online yesterday afternoon. We're going to be reviewing that today. What we're first going to do is go over some background information, so we're all on the same page. For those of you who didn't get to come to some earlier meetings, so we all understand how we developed the options, what's guiding the development of the options, and some of the background data. So what we're going to do is just briefly go over the Board of Ed approved resolution, which provides the scope, the board policy factors, which helps to guide our development of options, the guiding parameters for the development of our options, some current data, and then we'll go into the presentation of the options. And as Adrienne said, we're going to hold off on the questions until the very end. So we'll take some time to get through this, and what I'm going to do is go through in detail for the first option, and then we'll get into a rhythm for the rest of the options. In terms of the board resolution, the resolution was adopted on November 2018, and that's online. It does define the scope for Clarksburg, Northwest, and Seneca Valley High Schools, and we'll get into a little bit more detail of why we're looking at those 3 specific high schools. It also expanded the scope to include the middle schools for those 3 high schools that articulate to those 3 high schools. And relative to those middle schools, we're going to be looking at the enrollment patterns, utilization rates, and articulation patterns for those schools. At the end of the process, there'll be a report that goes to the board and superintendent of schools. That will be probably at the end of June, towards the end of July. And it's important to note that no changes to elementary school boundaries are being considered as part of this boundary study. So we are only looking at possible middle school and high school changes. So there are no changes to elementary school boundaries. Board of Education has a policy that guides the work that we do, which is the Educational Facilities Planning Policy, Policy FAA. And there are 4 factors that we consider that guide the work that our office does, that the superintendent will look at when he's making his recommendation to the board, and that the board will consider when making their recommendation. So the first is the demographic characteristics of student population. So there'll be an analysis of the options that take into account the overall population of the affected schools. And there are 7 characteristics when we get into the options that the school system looks at, staff provides data on, and those 7 characteristics are the racial and ethnic groups are African American, Asian American, Hispanic, white, and 2 or more races. And then the free and reduced meals population, farms rate, and ESOL population. And the board has asked that options should especially strive to create a diverse student population. The second factor is geography, and the options should take into account the geographic proximity of communities to schools, as well as the articulation patterns, traffic, transportation patterns, and topography. So we will talk about that in terms of all of the options. The third factor is the stability of school assignment over time. So options should result in stable assignments for as long a period as possible and should consider recent assignments. And I'll get into that, whether in this particular boundary study we don't need to worry about that, and I'll get into that in a few minutes. And the last factor is the facility utilization. So plans should result in facility utilization in the 80 to 100% ideally range over the long term whenever possible. We do look at shared use of facilities by more than 1 cluster in some cases, and we do have that here where some middle schools are what we call split articulated or shared by more than 1 school, and we should look at plans that are fiscally responsible. So we want to try to stay within that utilization rate and try not to have schools that are over or under and try to use them well. So as staff developed options, we did have some guiding parameters that we considered for all of the options. In terms of the factors, there are 3 policy factors that we use to develop these options, which are the demographic characteristics, geography, and facility utilization. For this particular boundary study, the stability factor does not need to be considered for this boundary study. And that's because the most recent boundary study that has occurred for the secondary schools was the Hallie Wells Middle School, and those students that were reassigned are not going to be impacted by this particular boundary study. So we don't need to worry about the stability factor. So that makes it a little bit easier in terms of looking at this boundary study. For this boundary study, we already have schools that are, middle schools that are split articulated, which means 1 middle school is sending students to 2 middle schools. So in these options, we have avoided creating triple articulation, which means that 1 middle school would send students to all 3 high schools. So we have avoided that in all of the options. That would be difficult for both the students and for the staff when they're registering students. So we have avoided what we would call triple articulation. We do not have that situation anywhere in the school system, and we did not think that would be a benefit or something that would be useful for the staff to have. In the options, we are trying to maximize and maintain walkers at our high schools and middle schools, and I'll get into that when it's appropriate in the options. I'll get into the data that no option is going to provide full relief capacity relief for either Clarksburg or Northwest. So we do not have enough space at Seneca Valley to provide the full relief. Now, we do have a plan for Crown High School in our capital improvements program, and that is anticipated that it can provide additional relief to Northwest High School. Because of that, we do have more options providing relief to Clarksburg than Northwest, but we do have a combination of options. And lastly, in our options, the superintendent has recommended that we grandfather both the 11th and 12th grade students at the high school level. For those of you who have students at high school already, 11th grade is a critical year when it comes to college applications. And so we talked, when we presented this to him, we as staff and the superintendent agreed that both the 11th and 12th graders should remain at their current high schools. And so all of the options are showing an implementation rate of 2 years for the high school. At the middle school, as we typically do, it'll be a 1-year grandfathering, so it'd be 6th and 7th graders the first year, with the 8th graders remaining at their middle school level. Now, that's a recommendation that the superintendent's made, and we're presenting that data in these options. The board will make that final decision. In terms of the data, why we're here in terms of the high school boundary studies, and what I want to do is go through this table so you understand how the data is presented, because in the options, the data is presented in a very similar way. So hopefully you can see the pointer. And so what we show in all of our tables for this presentation is the maximum number of seats, or the capacity of the school for each of the schools. So Clarksburg High School, they have a maximum number of seats of 2,034. In the next line, we have the projected enrollment, and we start in the implementation year, which is 2020-21 school year, which is the year that Seneca Valley High School is going to open. So in that year, the projected enrollment for Clarksburg High School is 2,374, and by the end of the 6-year period, they'll have about 2,850 students. The second line is the percent of building occupied, or the utilization rate. So you can see that for Clarksburg High School, they will be over that 80 to 100% utilization rate, so 117 to 140%. And then the available seats, the deficit. And so throughout that 5 or 6 year period, there will be a deficit at Clarksburg High School from 340 to over 800 seat deficit at Clarksburg High School. At Northwest, they have a capacity of 208, almost 2,300 students, and their projected enrollment is anywhere from 2,700 students to almost 3,000 students, and the available the seat deficit will be anywhere from 440 seats to almost 700 seats. And Seneca Valley, when it opens in 2020, will have almost 2,600 students, and their projected enrollment will be from 1,200 to 1,300 students, with the available seats of almost 1,300 students. Now, the seat deficit between Clarksburg and Northwest is almost 1,500 students, so you can see right there that we don't have enough seats to relieve both of the schools. Another point that when we get to the options, Dr. Smith, Seneca Valley High School has been expanded and is being built with career technology programs when it opens, and he has asked that we reserve about 500 seats for students outside of the service area for Seneca Valley. Now, that could serve Northwest students and Clarksburg High School students, but it can also serve students in a larger area. So of those 1,280 seats available, 500 seats are going to be reserved for CTE students. So we're only going to have about 800 seats available for this boundary study. And when we get to the options, you're going to see those students. On the other side, we show the racial and ethnic composition for each of the schools. And when we show the options, we're only going to be showing what the impact of the change will be if it were to happen this school year. We do not project racial and ethnic composition for student populations. So currently at Clarksburg High School, we have a racial and ethnic composition. What you do is you look down, the African American population is 28.7, 20.4 for Asian, 26.8 for Hispanic, 19.6 for white, and you can read across the line, and then the free and reduced meals 27.5, 8.2 for ESOL. And so those are indicators and things that the school system will look at in terms of the demographic characteristics. And then in terms of the map, as we get into the options, I want to orient you to the map, how to read the map, and they're color-coded. So the orange area, all of the maps as we see them in the options, on the left-hand side are the high school boundaries, and on the right side, on the right side are the middle school boundaries. The area in orange are the Clarksburg service area, and on the right side for the middle schools, there are two colors. In the orange color, the larger, darker color is Rocky Hill, and the lighter color here is Hallie Wells. The purple color is for Seneca Valley, so this is the current Seneca Valley boundaries. And then there are two shades here, one for King Middle School, and then the lighter sort of lavender color is for Clemente. And then the turquoise color is for Northwest High School, and then there are two shades, one for Lakelands Park and one for Kingsview. Now some of these schools, like Clemente, are shared between Northwest and Seneca Valley, but we're just showing some relative ideas. The blue lines are showing the elementary school boundaries, and then the red lines on here, on this side for the middle schools, are showing the high school boundaries. So now we're going to get into the option development. Is there just a clarifying question? Is there a way, is the MST here to focus the projector? Okay, I'll continue, all right. So we're going to start with option one, and I'm going to take a little bit more time on option one so you can understand how to read all the information. And for each option, I'm going to go through the data first. Is that clearer? Yes?
Thank you.
Thumbs up? Great. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to go through option one first in a little bit more detail so you understand how to read the tables. Then I'm going to show you an articulation chart to show you how the articulation may change in each option. And then we're going to go through the map. So this is how we're going to go through this. Be patient with me. We have 8 options to go through. I'll pick up the speed after we get through option one. So in option one, we're going to do the high school proposed changes. And I want to remind everybody, these are proposed options. There are no recommendations being made at this point. Staff is not making any recommendations. It's the superintendent that's going to make a recommendation in October. These are a range of options that are being presented by staff to advance the different factors, demographics, geography, and utilization. So each option will do a different range of factors. Sometimes it's one factor, sometimes it's multiple factors. So it's a range of options that staff is presenting. There are no recommendations. They're not presented in any order. So there's not like a preference. They're just sort of random options that are being presented, because that was a question that was asked last night. There is no order to these. They're just done as staff develop them. So for the first one, for the high school, we would reassign Daly and Fox Chapel from Clarksburg High School to Seneca Valley High School. So as we read through the chart, on the top, and in each option, we're only showing the schools that have a proposed change. So for this particular one, there are no reassignments out of Northwest, so we're not showing Northwest High School on this table. So we showed you the data earlier, and in the packet, you do have the information at the beginning of the packet, but we're not showing Northwest right now because there's no proposed change. So the top part shows the current data as we showed it earlier. With the change, if we were to reassign Daly and Fox Chapel out of Clarksburg to Seneca Valley, it would reduce the enrollment. And we tend to look throughout, in the first 2 years, as I said, the first year would only be 9th and 10th graders that are reassigned out. So we still have 11th and 12th graders at the school. In the second year, it's 9th, 10th, and 11th graders. And it's not until the third year that you have the full implementation of 9th through 12th graders, and so you don't feel the full effect at either school until the third year. So what you see is sort of a relative impact of the school, and so you would see by the end of the 6th year a reduction in this deficit of the available seats from 800 to about 173 seats. And at Seneca Valley, when we look at the change, you'll see that the enrollment would go up to about 2,000, and then we have a separate line for the 500 students that are reserved for the CTE programs. So we would still have some seats available at the end of the 6 years. As I said, what we do for the racial and ethnic composition and farms in ESOL is we show what the change would be if we were to do the change this year, because we do not project the demographic information. So if we were to do the change this year, the African American population would drop at Clarksburg. The Asian population would increase from 20.4 to 24.5. The Hispanic population would decrease. The white population would increase. The two or more racial category would stay relatively the same. The free and reduced meal category would reduce from 27.5 to 20.4, and the ESOL population would reduce from 8.2 to 4.8. At Seneca Valley, the African American population would drop from 34.6 to 33.8. The Asian population would reduce from 10.9 to 10.5. Hispanic, 35.8, would go up to 40%. The white population would be reduced from 14.5 to 11.8. The two or more would stay relatively the same. The free and reduced meals would go up from 39.0 to 41.3, and the ESOL population would go up about 1%. So that's how you read the tables for each of the options. For the middle schools, in all of the options, we have reassigned the Great Seneca Creek Elementary School right now is split articulated to Clemente and Kingsview. So in all of the options, we have reassigned the portion of Great Seneca Creek that attends Clemente to Kingsview Middle School. And the reason we've done that is because Clemente is a school of over 1,200, capacity 1,200 students, and already has 1,300 students and is projected to be at about 1,400 students, which is a very large middle school for Montgomery County Public Schools. So staff sees that it would be beneficial to reduce that population, to bring it down to its capacity, and reassign students to Kingsview. So we would eliminate that split articulation for that elementary school. Now, it would create a space deficit at Kingsview by doing that. So it brings the enrollment down at Clemente to its capacity, but it does increase the population of Kingsview up above its capacity, but within the a range that middle schools, that MCPS has for middle schools within the 1,200 range. And then you can see the relative changes within the racial and ethnic composition. I'm not going to go through that for every single option because we would be here for a very long time. So you can see what those changes are for each of the options. Now for each table, for each option, we've created an articulation chart to show you what changes have occurred in the articulation patterns, because it's not always clear in the data. And so in this particular option, by reassigning Daly and Fox Chapel from Clarksburg to Seneca Valley, Daly and Fox Chapel attend Neillsville Middle School, and we're going to Clarksburg High. We're attending, articulating to Clarksburg High School. Daly and Fox Chapel would continue to attend, articulate to Neillsville Middle School, but then would articulate to Seneca Valley High School. So it's not a change in boundary assignment, but it's a change in articulation. So these two boxes have moved from the orange to the purple. So Neillsville would no longer articulate to Clarksburg High School, it would now articulate to Seneca Valley High School. And then the other change is that Great Seneca Creek, as you can see here, currently has two lines, one going to Clemente, one going to Kingsview, and then with the change would be straight articulation to Kingsview Middle School. And the way to read these, how we identify the changes, is when there's a change, we've bolded it in a dark color, and if there's the school that has changed is bolded and is underlined. So I hope that's clear of how to read these articulation charts. And then how to read the maps. And as Adrian told you, there is an interactive map where you'll be able to enter your address, because it's not possible for us to put all the streets, because it's a very large geographic area, and it's impossible for us to put every street on a small 8.5 by 11 map, but you will be able to put your street address in the interactive map to confirm whether you're in the in an option. But the way to read the map is if there's an area that's changed. So this is Fox Chapel and Daly. They've changed from orange to the purple, and then we've also designated it by this diagonal black hatch mark. So you can see that this area, if you were to look at the current map, it would have been orange, and now it's in this purple with the diagonal black line. And for the middle school, the area of Great Seneca Creek that would have been lavender is now the turquoise color, and it's identified with the hatch mark. So that's how to read the maps and how to see if your area has changed. So now I will go through the options a little bit more quickly in terms of the data, so we can get to your questions in a timely fashion. So for option 2, just want to make sure I get all the information out. In option 2, we propose to reassign Daly and Gibbs Elementary School from Clarksburg to Seneca Valley High School. In this particular option, it would provide the capacity relief to Clarksburg High School and still leave some seats available to Seneca Valley High School. Again, in this option, there is no impact to Northwest High School, so we're providing all of the relief to Clarksburg High School. And again, you can see what the changes would be to the racial and ethnic composition. And another thing in your packet that I didn't mention, at the very end, there's a comparison for each school. So you can, in each option, you can compare school to school, but at the end of the packet, when you go online, or if you've copied it, you can see it's each option by school. So if you just wanted to see what all the options are for Seneca Valley High School or for Northwest High School, you can then compare how each option compares for one school. So it's a summary by school. And Gibbs from Rocky Hill to Neillsville. So there is a change in the middle school reassignments here in order to maintain the straight articulation. If we kept them at their current schools, we would have that triple articulation issue that we're trying to avoid. So on this first page, we have the same There's no change, this is what those changes are. So there is a change in their racial and ethnic composition by making these changes to the schools. For the articulation pattern, Neillsville becomes a feeder to Seneca Valley, but it would be Daly and Gibbs. And Fox Chapel would now become a Rocky Hill feeder to Clarksburg. So when Fox Chapel used to go to Neillsville, it would now be reassigned to Rocky Hill, and Great Seneca would continue with that change. In this particular option, here's the area that would be reassigned to Seneca Valley, this purple area. What it does create is Fox Chapel, although there is no change to Fox Chapel, it creates what we call a non-contiguous or island assignment now to Clarksburg. So this orange area now is non-contiguous to the remaining area of Clarksburg High School. And then this part of Rocky Hill is somewhat contiguous, but not as contiguous as it would have been before. And this is the same change. So option 3. Option 3 is a variation of option 2, but now we start to introduce some areas of Northwest High School to the option. So we have Daly and Gibbs, but we have some island assignments, and I will show those to you in the map if you don't know where they are. Clopper Mill, there's an island assignment, and Matsunaga, there's an island assignment. Those island assignments happen to be directly across the street off of Wisteria Boulevard, directly across the street from Seneca Valley High School on Wisteria Boulevard. And so staff wanted to see what that impact would be to reassign students that could walk to Seneca Valley High School. They currently are, some of those neighborhoods can actually see the new construction of Seneca Valley High School, but currently attend Northwest High School. So by doing this proposed option, we have it's the same impact on Clarksburg High School, but now we would now introduce a change to Northwest High School and reassign some students out, so there would be a reduction in the space deficit at Northwest High School. It would now fill Seneca Valley High School, so there would be a slight seat deficit at Seneca Valley High School, but something that they can definitely handle at a new school. And then, again, here you can see some of the changes in their racial and ethnic composition if we were to do that. So there's some changes in the racial and ethnic composition. For the middle school, the Clopper Mill Island already attends Clemente, and Clemente is a Seneca Valley feeder, so we don't need to make a change there. But in order to maintain a straight feeder pattern to Seneca Valley High School, the Matsunaga Island would be reassigned from Kingsview to King, and then we continue with the same Great Seneca Creek. So there's no change here for Clemente. There is a change for King. So by reassigning these students from Kingsview to King, it would fill King, and there would be just a very slight space deficit, but something that we would just monitor. And then Kingsview, it's the same, there would just be a slight reduction. And then Neillsville, it's the same option for Neillsville and Rocky Hill as we just showed. And then for this particular one, it does create a split articulation for Matsunaga, because now Matsunaga would attend both, would be split articulated to King and to Kingsview by doing this. And so it does create a new split articulation. And then let me show you on the map. They're very hard to see, so bear with me because they're small islands. Right here, this area right here is the Clopper Mill Island, and hidden behind this red triangle is the Matsunaga Island, which are the apartments known as the Point at Germantown, I think it is. I have it written down. I'll confirm that if you're not sure. But it's these two areas right here, these two areas in purple that were blue. Here's Seneca Valley High School right here. So as you can see, They're the two areas that are directly across the street from Seneca Valley High School. Again, this is an opportunity to try to maximize walkers to Seneca Valley High School. And in the middle school map, we would just be reassigning this one area to King. Okay, now option 4, we're moving in a different direction geographically. So in option 4, we would reassign Darnestown from Northwest to Seneca Valley and Little Bennett from Clarksburg to Seneca Valley High School. So in this option, we provide some relief to both high schools. So as you can see, there's a deficit of almost 450 seats and 550 seats at Clarksburg and Northwest. It sort of splits the difference in terms of their deficits. We don't provide as much relief to Clarksburg, and we provide some relief to Northwest High School. It does leave more seats available at Seneca Valley High School. This option is the option that does advance the demographic factor more than any other of the options that are developed by staff. And in this one, in order to avoid the triple articulation for Lakelands Park, Darnestown would be reassigned from Lakelands Park to King Middle School, and Little Bennett from Rocky Hill to King. So again, we're trying to avoid some of those split articulations. And so those changes, if we go to the next slide, what you'll see that at Lakelands Park, it would bring down their enrollment at the school and create some space deficit and provide some seats available. And at King, there would be just a slight space deficit by moving the Darnestown students to King.
Yeah, it's just an error. It should be elementary.
It should be elementary school. Thank you. We'll take care of that. Thank you. And so as you can see here, what we're doing is we have created straight articulation for Darnestown and King, so we don't have the triple articulation for Lakelands Park, but we have created split articulation for Rocky Hill Middle School with Little Bennett. And then for the map, we have a non-contiguous boundary for Seneca Valley. So the purple area is this new Seneca Valley boundary, would be the new Seneca Valley boundary. So here's the current boundary. This is Little Bennett here, and this is Darnestown here. So in this proposed option, it would be a non-contiguous boundary. And for the middle school, Darnestown is proposed to be reassigned to King, so that would be a non-contiguous boundary for King. Okay, in option 5, the proposal is to reassign Germantown from Northwest to Seneca Valley and Gibbs from Clarksburg to Seneca Valley, along with the Copper Mill and Matsunaga Islands. And so in this option, we're also splitting the difference and providing relief to both Northwest and Clarksburg. This option provides more relief to Northwest High School than the previous option, and still leaves seats available at Seneca Valley High School. You can see what some of the changes are in the demographic profile for each of the schools, and what the changes would be for each of the schools. For this particular option, we would reassign the Great Seneca piece from Clemente to Kingsview, and that's the only change here. So there are no other changes for the middle school. So we've reviewed. Checking that. And then the islands, the Matsunaga Island from Kingsview to King. So we've reviewed that already. And the change here is that we have Germantown being reassigned. Germantown was here, a northwest feeder would now become a Seneca Valley feeder. Germantown is already a Copper Mill feeder, so there's no change in its middle school, it's just a change in its high school feeder. And then Gibbs, once again, in this option, is split articulated. Rocky Hill becomes a split articulated school, so the purple means that it's going to Seneca Valley, and Rocky Hill is split articulated to Seneca Valley and Clarksburg. The map shows here Germantown and the islands going to Seneca Valley along with Gibbs. Now, as we mentioned earlier, one of our guiding parameters is trying to maintain walkers. Germantown currently walks to Northwest High School, but Germantown can also walk to Seneca Valley High School. So this is a particular option. They can walk to either school. So in proposing this option, it would not change the status of Germantown Elementary School in terms of where it can walk. (5A) is very similar to option 5. The only difference, so the high school option is the same. The only difference in this option is that Gibbs would be reassigned from Rocky Hill to King in order to eliminate that split articulation for Rocky Hill. So I won't go through the high school option because we've reviewed that already. So what would happen in this option is by reassigning Gibbs from Rocky Hill to King, it creates a large space deficit for King. They only have a capacity for 914 students. Their enrollment would go up to about 1,200 students, which is within a desired range for middle schools, but it does create a deficit of almost 300 students. So that would be something that the school system, if the superintendent wanted to consider this option, it's something the school system would have to consider about the need for a capital project for King. And on the flip side, what it does for Rocky Hill is it reduces the enrollment at Rocky Hill below its capacity of 1,020 seats, and its enrollment below 800 students, which is actually a fairly small middle school. So it eliminates the split articulation, but it does create an imbalance in terms of the size of the schools and the utilizations of the schools. So those are things that if the superintendent were to consider this option, he'd have to also consider what that means in terms of the building and capital budget needs. But in terms of articulation, as you can see, Rocky Hill then would no longer be split articulated. It would be a straight feeder to Clarksburg High School, and Gibbs would then go straight to King. So here's Gibbs right here. And from a map perspective, this is Gibbs here. Gibbs would be a contiguous boundary assignment to King Middle School. So option 6, we're in the home stretch, only 2 more options to go. We would reassign a portion of Gibbs and Fox Chapel and a portion of Germantown. So this is trying to create a more geographic boundary change by looking at some streets or geographic and topographical areas in the map as one of the factors suggests we could look at. And so in doing this, it reassigns less students out of Clarksburg than some of the other options, and a few less students out of Northwest in doing this. And it also does the islands and leaves us with just a slight, so it leaves us with a deficit of about 200 seats at Clarksburg, a deficit of about 500 seats at Northwest, and just a slight deficit at Seneca Valley. And you can see some of the changes in the racial and ethnic composition in farms in Esau. For the middle school assignment, Fox Chapel would be reassigned from Needlesville to King. Great Seneca continues, and then the Naga Island would be reassigned from Kingsview to King. So the change here would be the reassignment of Fox Chapel from Neelsville to King, and in doing that, well, we've seen that one already. So there's, the big change here is reassigning students from Neelsville, and in doing that, it reduces the population at Neelsville. Again, below that 80% utilization, and leaves Neelsville with about 200 seats available. So, and then it reassigns students out of Rocky Hill, and so it leaves Rocky Hill, it reassigns students to Rocky Hill and leaves a space deficit at Rocky Hill. And so in this one, it gives us, again, split articulated in this particular option, and similar to in option 5. And then Matsunaga is, again, split articulated because of the islands. So in this map, as we said, this is doing a portion of Gibbs. So this is south of West Old Baltimore Road, and brings in 355. So it cuts off this part. This part of Gibbs would remain at Clarksburg along with Daly. So it reassigns this portion of Gibbs along with Fox Chapel, and it reassigns the northern portion of Germantown. So what it does, it sort of splits the difference. Because Germantown can walk to both Northwest and Seneca Valley, in this option, the southern part of Germantown would stay at Northwest, and the northern portion would walk and be reassigned to Seneca Valley. And then for option 6, for the middle school, Fox Chapel is reassigned to King, and we have the same option here. And lastly, in option 7, we reassign McNair from Northwest High School to Seneca Valley, and Fox Chapel from Clarksburg to Seneca Valley. So again, trying to see what the impact would be at Northwest and Clarksburg. So in this option, we provide more relief to Northwest High School than we do to Clarksburg High School. So this one, most of the other options, we provide more relief to Clarksburg or split the difference. In this particular option, we provide more relief to Northwest High School because it leaves them with a space deficit of only 150 seats. And it actually leaves Seneca Valley with a space deficit of about 65 seats. And then you can see what the changes are in the racial and ethnic composition and free reduced meals and ESOL. For the middle school, it reassigns Fox Chapel from Neelsville to Clemente, Germantown from Clemente to Kingsview, and then the Great Seneca Creek split articulation, it takes care of that. So by reassigning Germantown from Clemente to Kingsview, it brings Kingsview well over its capacity again. And the reason this is being done is because the other changes to Clemente would keep Clemente almost at 1,500 students, which again is a very large school. So this option moves Germantown from one Northwest feeder to another Northwest feeder to help balance those enrollments at the Northwest middle schools. And so for the articulation chart, Germantown was moved from Copper Mill to the Kingsview Theater, and here is the Island Theater again, and then Fox Chapel being moved again. And in the map, here's McNair being reassigned to Seneca Valley, and Fox Chapel being assigned to Seneca Valley, and then Fox Chapel being assigned to Clemente, and the areas of, Great Seneca Creek and the Germantown area being assigned to the Kingsview area. So that's the end of the presentation of the options.
Debbie, before you continue,
Yep.
does anybody have any questions yet on their cards so that we can start collecting them, so we'll be prepared to answer? That's great. We'll start walking around.
Okay. So in terms of reassignments, we did ask our colleagues in the Department of Transportation to give us some average bus times of what these reassignments could mean for students if they were reassigned from one area to another. These are average bus times. Our Department of Transportation, when they do this, they do take into account traffic patterns. They have all that information in their computer-aided systems. When they do bus routes, they actually may have different ways to get to schools than how you may get to schools, with back routes and back roads. And so McNair currently walks, most of the area walks to Northwest. Some of the area can actually walk to Seneca Valley, but the remaining area, if it were to be reassigned, would an average bus time, so they take different points in the service area, would be an average bus time of 15 minutes. For daily, the average change would be, I don't know, okay, would be about 1 minute difference. Gibbs, there's no change in the average bus time. It's about 15 minutes to both Clarksburg and Seneca Valley. For Fox Chapel, it's about a 3-minute difference in the average bus ride. Little Bennett, it's a 5-minute difference to go from Clarksburg to Seneca Valley. I just said that they do consider, I just said that, and I'm not going to take other, I said I don't want to be, we're going to take questions at the end. Our Department of Transportation has traffic patterns in the morning, in the afternoon. They have all of that already taken into account. They are aware of this when they're considering bus routes. And they have back routes, and they take lots of different, they have different ways oftentimes than how we may actually travel when they're doing their routing. So this is a relative difference. Students are being picked up on their routes, and once they get on the route. So and these are average bus routes, so there may be kids who are at the end of the service area that are going to be further away, that may be longer, and then some that are going to be shorter. So Darnestown would be, the average bus route would take 5 more minutes. So from Northwest to Seneca Valley, it's an additional 5 minutes beyond. Now, that doesn't mean that every child is 40 minutes. There could be some that are further or more time and some that are going to be shorter. But these are their average bus times. And yes, they do have all the traffic taken into account in the morning and in the afternoon. As Adrian mentioned, there's an interactive map. If you want to, it's all on the website, so you can get to this. Maybe after questions, we can try to see if this works. It didn't work yesterday, but I won't try to work on it now. But if afterwards, we'll see if it's working to show you how it's working. But just so I can explain, if you can imagine on the top-hand corner, there's a little search button where you can try to be as specific as possible with your address. Because, you want me to try it? Let's try it this way. So on the top right-hand corner, there's a search button. What I was going to say is, if you just put in a street name, I tried it the other day, I got to London. If I just put an average street name, it worked, great, fabulous. So, so I just put in Waters Landing Drive. As you can see right up here is the search button, search drive. I just put in a name of a street in the Seneca Valley service area. Right here you can see, you can zoom out. I'm going to zoom out a bit so you can see the whole area. we've got the elementary schools, the high school boundaries, and if you click on layers, so you can see you've got the school locations, high school current boundaries, the current boundaries, we can put the middle school boundaries. You should be able to click and show each of the boundaries. And right now, and if you could see the relative colors changing on the screen, do you see that? Did you see how like this turned orange up here? So if you put in your address, you'll be able to play around with that and actually see where you live when you do this at home, okay? Thumbs up? Yes? Great. Right, so next steps. The pink sheets, again, that's the evaluation form for tonight's meeting. So at the end of the meeting, if you can let us know how we're doing with the meeting, one of our performance measurements, there'll be a box as you're leaving. As Adrian mentioned, there'll be a stakeholder survey that we're hoping to have by the end of the week. There'll be a Connected that goes out to let you know when it's up and running. It'll be on our website, and it'll be available for about 2 weeks. Gives you time to really review the options in a little bit more detail. You've had this presentation, we'll be answering your questions, you'll be able to take some time at home to look at it, and then you'll be able to fill out that survey and give us some additional feedback. Then we have the next round of meetings, which are going to be in April, and at those meetings, we're going to be presenting the feedback on the surveys, and if there's any additional options that we're going to present at that next round of meetings, and we'll be laying out what the next steps are as well. I will get the website up. I don't know what happened, so we'll have the website. It didn't end up on the file. So as you're answering questions, I'll put our website up. If you don't know where it is, it's there on there. With that, sorry. Adrian's going to start answering questions, and if we need to tag team, we will. Thank you.
You got pause.
Thank you.
So I'm going to go through the questions. I have all of them here. You may see me like skipping one. That's because we've already answered it. So like, for example, there's a bunch of questions about Crown. So I'll answer it, of course, one time and hopefully get the answer that everybody is looking for. I will start going through these one by one. I may need to put my glasses on now. Who will and how to select, I think, an option? Will there be more options? So as we indicated, these are staff options that we have developed. When we are done with the process, we provide a report to the superintendent, which includes all of the options, background information, details, information from the surveys. If we receive anything else, feedback from transportation, we will include that in the report. Superintendent makes a recommendation in October. There will be a public hearing process, and then the Board of Education makes their decision in November. That being said, there is an opportunity, so in this process, this is the first round of options, because I know there was another question about options. This is the only one. This is the first round of options. We will go back to our office after we're done with our meetings, after we see some of the results from the surveys, talking to transportation, looking at all the data again. If we feel we need to develop more options, there could be a second round of options. We actually have a second set of meetings set in April towards the end of April. And we will put information on our website as it comes available. So if that next meeting, if the decision is we're not going to create more options, additional options, then we will let you know and tell you what that next meeting in April will be about. That being said, the superintendent does not have to go, if, let's say, for example, we don't do any more options. Superintendent doesn't have to pick one of the 7. He can pick his own. He can make his own, he can decide his own, he could combine 2 options, he can do whatever he wants. That will be a decision once he evaluates all of the data and all of the options, all of the feedback. And at the same time, after the superintendent makes his recommendation, whatever it is, the Board of Education can actually put alternatives on the table. They have to do that as part of their first work session, so that is before the public hearing, so people can testify on those alternatives. If the board does not put any alternatives on the table during their work session in the fall, then the only thing that we're looking at, that the community is looking at, that the board is looking at, is the superintendent's recommendation. Okay? So I answered this about options. Are assignments based on addresses or where a child attended? So the way a child is assigned to a school is from their address. Every address is associated with an elementary, middle, and high school. When we are doing the boundary studies, where in this case, for this boundary study, we looked at the elementary school service areas. So the addresses that are in the service areas. So if a service area boundary, an elementary boundary, is reassigned, it is everybody in that boundary area that would be then reassigned to the school. So this question, are the factors that we use for developing our options weighted? The answer to that is no, they are not weighted. There are 4 factors. Debbie alluded to the policy. There is language in the policy that talks about each of the factors, but there are no weightings to them. They are not in any kind of a priority order, and then when we do our options, we consider all the factors as we develop each one of the options. Oh, this is weighted. Can I go into some more detail about Crown High School? So Crown High School right now is an approved project in our capital improvements program. For what the board is requesting this year for their FY20 capital budget, there is a request to start planning, so we're asking for planning funds. However, there is no completion date right now for the project. What the superintendent recommended last year and the board approved is that we would go through the planning process, or at least start the planning process, and then the superintendent would recommend a completion date. So right now, that's where we are. We're hoping that we get the planning funds approved by the county council, which will happen in May. Then we can start the planning, and then after that, superintendent would make a recommendation regarding the completion date. That being said, when we're looking at who could potentially populate that school, so in the superintendent's recommended CIP, there are 5 high schools that are identified as schools that are overutilized, that in the mid-county area that would look to populate that school in some form or fashion. And the 5 high schools are Richard Montgomery, Gaithersburg, Thomas Wooten, Northwest, and Quince Orchard. Okay. Oh, there's a second part to this. Is there any future plans to deal with potential overcrowding at Kingsview? So I think Debbie alluded to this, that in some of the options, some of the schools do become overutilized, and that's when we would look at if it meets our threshold of overutilization. At the elementary school, it's 92 seats. At a middle school, it's 150 seats. We would look to then start a feasibility study for an addition for that school. So right now, until we know what the options, what actually gets approved by the board, we wouldn't be doing anything, and then any school would have to meet that threshold in order to start a feasibility study. And this is about Crown. Do we know what programs will be offered at Seneca Valley High School? Yes, we do. And actually on our website is the presentation from our first meeting, the first public meeting that we had, and in there we have each of the 3 high schools and all of the programs at each of those high schools. So the new CTE programs that will be at Seneca Valley, we also describe the programs that are at Clarksburg and the programs that are at Northwest. So if you go on our website, you can find that PowerPoint presentation, and I think it's like almost midway through, and you'll see it talks about all of the programs. So would students at Clarksburg and Northwest have preference to attend CTE programs at Seneca Valley High School? So I don't have the answer to that yet. There has been discussion about that, especially since because those seats are being reserved for CTE, it doesn't give us as much flexibility to reassign students. So I can't answer that as a yes or a no, but it is something that actually we have already been discussing. Oh, I'm sorry, career and technology education programs. So there are a variety of programs, and actually the presentation that's online will let you know all the programs that are part of the CTE that will be at Seneca Valley. So this one sort of relates to program as well. What it's asking is, for example, at Northwest High School, there is the Ulysses program, right? If you will be next year an incoming 9th grader, when the boundaries are implemented, you would be a 10th grader. In which case, if you were reassigned, you would be reassigned as a 10th grader to a new school. So we have had many questions. If I'm in a program, if my child is in a program, do they then get to stay at the school? And the answer is we don't have that answer yet. So what we are trying to do, there are many programs. At an elementary school, it's easier. There aren't a whole lot of programs at an elementary school level. At a high school, it's a lot more difficult. So we are evaluating all of the programs at all of the 3 schools. We are trying to see if there is any correlation between any of the programs. Sometimes they're called different things, but they actually basically provide the same curriculum and programs. So we're trying to do that, and then a decision will have to be made, and that's part of the implementation that the superintendent will recommend, whether or not, because there are many programs and kids in them, and a decision will have to be made which programs potentially kids could stay in if they are in that 10th grade year, because remember 11th and 12th from the superintendent's perspective in these options, 11th and 12th graders are grandfathered. So that's something that we are looking at and will be part of the superintendent's recommendation. This is about Crown. So this is also about Crown, and it says, is it reasonable to provide relief to Clarksburg High School now and wait for Crown High School to provide relief for Northwest? So we considered that, and so as you saw, it is a process that is used for all different types of reasons. What I would say is go on our website and you can look at, it's COSA, the acronym is COSA. You can look at the information regarding COSA and what their process is and what they consider. It's usually considered a hardship, so you'd have to present a hardship. If, for example, in this case, if your 9th grader stayed with if it was a 12th grader, so the 12th grader would get bused, which means your 9th grader would get bused because the bus is coming. Once that child graduates, there's no more bus, which means that your 10th grader then wouldn't have a bus for the remainder of the time that they remained at the school. And that's in most cases with COSA assignments. So that being said, what I would just suggest is that if anybody's interested and wants to look at that, just go on our website, go on the MCPS website, just type in COSA, COSA, and it'll take you right to their website and provide a lot of information regarding the COSA process. So are transportation costs considered? Absolutely. So we look at transportation. As we showed you, we did show you the travel times. We maximize walkers whenever we can. Transportation comes out of the operating budget, which is the same budget that we pay our teachers with, so it's very important to have and consider those operating costs. So it is a consideration, and so again, with the factors that we have developed, some work better in advancing some factors, and some don't work as well. We say this, we said it last night, and we continue to say, there's not one perfect option that addresses all the factors in the best way. So I answered this, with the future Crown affect Quince Orchard, and I told you Quince Orchard is one of the 5 high schools that is looking, that will be addressed. Oh, I'm sorry. So Crown High School, the question was, what is QO? Is Quince Orchard going to be addressed with Crown? And so, yes, Quince Orchard is one of the 5 high schools I said that when Crown is built, it will, they're all overutilized. It is overutilized and will be addressed with the new Crown High School. So option 4 would still leave split articulation at Lakelands. So Lakelands is split articulated because some of the students go to Quince Orchard and some of the students go to Northwest. Similarly, the way we have Neelsville, some of the students go to Clarksburg, some of the students go to Watkins Mill. QO, Quince Orchard, was not part of the boundary study, so that is split articulation we could not fix. That split articulation will remain because Quince Orchard is not part of the boundary study. Let's see. So this asks what was the impact for bus times for the options. We did show some of the information regarding the travel distances, the times for some of the options. Those are averages. Those were not, we didn't do every house to figure out the distance. It is an average time, how long what the impact would be for each of those options. So this question, how does this affect students already at Northwest High School? So I think I answered this, but I will clarify again. The options that are presented grandfather the 11th and 12th graders. So when Seneca Valley opens, which is in 2020, not this September, but the following September, if your child is an 11th or 12th grader and you are reassigned, that child would remain at their home school, whether it's Northwest or Clarksburg. If they are a rising 9th grader or 10th grader, they could be reassigned, will be reassigned, potentially will be reassigned, again, depending on, and again, the implementation about program is something we're still looking at, but all things being equal, the 9th and 10th graders would then be reassigned. So again, this is, so it says, I'm a Darnestown Elementary School district with a daughter at Lakelands. If option 4 is chosen, will she still feed into Northwest? So option 4 is the one that reassigns Darnestown to Seneca Valley. So no, the answer is that reassignment would occur and Darnestown then would feed into, eventually feed into Seneca Valley High School. Why did you put an option to relieve only one high school instead of the 3 high schools? So only 2 of the 3 need relief. Clarksburg and Northwest. Seneca we're making bigger to accommodate those 2 schools' overutilization. Again, because as we said in the beginning, there is not one option that will relieve all the utilization for both the schools. With Crown being on the books, a future new high school, We did provide some options that would relieve more of Clarksburg and less of, or not, Northwest, and options that would relieve both of them. So would it be possible you combine options, and they gave an example, like, for example, 1 and 2. So again, if we are looking at developing additional options, there's only so many ways you can split the pie. And so we certainly would look at mixing some of the options that we've already developed. So if we did provide additional options, you probably would look at them and say, oh, that looks like option whatever, only this is changed instead of that. So certainly that's something that we are going to be looking at in the next couple of weeks. And as I said again, the superintendent, when he looks at all the data, looks at the options that were developed, he can do the same thing as well. Say, I like this part of this option, can we do something different with this option? And then he comes up with a new option himself. Brown High School. So this is sort of what is used to calculate geography. So when we talk about geography, we look at adjacencies, we do look at distances, we look at contiguous boundaries as opposed to island assignments. And so all of that is considered. We look at major roads. We look at, for example, 270 is a major road where you could potentially split, one area and another area with 270 being right down the middle. So there's lots of things that we look at with geography when we're considering that factor when we develop the options. I talked about this. This was about siblings. We do not prioritize the factors. That was already asked. Will the options be narrowed down? No. So we are not going to narrow down any option. So we have our 7 options. It's really 8 because there's a 5 and a 5A, but there's 7 options. Those will remain. If we develop additional options, those will be added onto, and the superintendent will see the 7 that we have created and whatever else we create. We do not take anything away. We will only add to, if we add to. This is about Crown again. Will we be able to vote? So there will be a survey out. Go to the survey. That is my answer. And on top of that, and let me just remind you again, so the opportunity to provide feedback. So the survey is one of them. The second one, as I said, is the CIP process, the capital improvements process, which will happen once the superintendent releases, which is the end of October. There are public hearings. They hold 2-night public hearings in early November. And I always say at any time, you can write the superintendent and you can write the board. Just go on the website. There's a tab for the superintendent. There's a tab for the board. It has the 2 email addresses, and you can write at any time. So those are your opportunities to let everyone know how you feel about the options, not just the survey. So I think this question is asking about, again, just to reiterate, we talked about schools that potentially with these options that are currently not overutilized, that will become overutilized with the options. As we said, if that is the case, the option is chosen, the students are reassigned, the overutilization occurs. If that school meets that threshold of overutilization, we will look to do a capital project. Debbie indicated that Neelsville is one of 9 schools. We have a new project in our CIP, major capital projects. Neelsville has been identified as one of the 9 schools to start that process. So it is already identified, and we will be working through that process over the next couple of years. Any of the other schools, whether it's Kingsview or King or any that become overutilized as a result of an approved reassignment, again, we will look at that as it occurs. And this one was answered. Are there any other? More?
Can I just, there's a couple of questions. Sorry, there's a camera here, so I just realized that. Since we're being live streamed. There's a couple of questions here about if my child's a certain grade, would they be impacted if they're in 7th grade, if they're in 8th grade? One thing we're going to do is put a table on the website about what grade, but I'll sort of go through it right now. If your child is currently in 7th grade this year, they would be in 9th grade in the 2020 school year for the implementation year. So if they were recommended for a boundary change, yes, they would be impacted by a possible boundary change. If they're currently in 8th grade this year, they would then be in 10th grade, so they would be impacted by the boundary change. If they're currently in 9th grade this year, they would be in 11th grade, or if they're in 10th grade this year, they would be a senior, then they would be grandfathered. What we're going to do, I'm proposing, is to put a table up on the website, so for folks who didn't have the benefit of hearing that today, they can see that more clearly of what grade you're in right now. But if you do have students in 7th and 8th grade right now, you could possibly, again, possibly be impacted by a proposed boundary change for the high school level, okay? So that impacts because people have been asking that specifically about my child.
Okay, there's just a few more that I will go through. Oh, sorry, Chris. How will the countywide boundaries survey assessment impact this boundary study? So for those who do not know, the Board of Education just recently approved a resolution to start to conduct a countywide boundary assessment. It's not a boundary study. There's not one specific area that's being recommended for anything. What the consultants and consultants will be hired to do that boundary assessment. They're going to be looking at our schools, our boundaries, data, information, adjacencies, overutilization, available capacity, everything related, and provide the Board of Education with a report that will provide all of that information to them. The board would have to then decide, and I believe that that's about a year process, the board then would have to implement or make a recommendation and approve specific boundary studies. So it is not, I know some people think that it's a countywide boundary study and right away all boundaries are going to be changed. That's actually not the case. The board would have to recommend boundary studies for specific areas once they get this information, or they may just have the information. What I would say is that it will be a longer process. And we have built Seneca Valley. It will have almost 1,200 seats available, and there are 2 adjacent schools that will be significantly overutilized, so that's something that we're doing for now. Why is Northwest considered up county and mid county? I don't know if it's considered one or both. So Crown is considered the mid county just by a general geography, and Crown will relieve 5 high schools. I don't know, I wouldn't think that we would consider RM wouldn't be considered an up-county school. So when we talk about mid-county, up-county, I think it's just a general reference. Damascus, you may consider more up-county, or Clarksburg, but it's just a reference. There's not a defined what Northwest, whether it's a mid-county or an up-county school. Time for April meetings. So I think all of our meetings are from 7 to 9. Please check our website. We actually already have the schedule on there for our April meetings. We will do Connect Eds as we have been doing, but the information for those April meetings are online already. Why isn't stability a factor when Darnestown was affected by a boundary change actually it was prior to 2000 because Northwest opened in 2000. So that's a long time ago. And so we're talking, by the time Seneca Valley opens, that will be 20 years. Those kids, if there were, are not here anymore. What we try to do when we talk about impacting or stability of school assignments, so it's sort of a two-part factor. The first part is about creating boundaries that will stand the test of time based upon the information that we know today, looking at the future as well. So when we do boundary studies, we look at enrollment projections 6 years out. We try to see trends, understand what's going on. So that's the first part of it. The second one is to not affect the same students. So for example, if we did a boundary study this year, students were affected. 2 years later, they moved to a new school and that same student is affected again. That's the difference. This was when Northwest opened, it was 20 years ago. And so that was some time ago. So will future options possibly look at involving other high schools? No. So when the board approves a boundary study, they approve the parameters of the study, who will be included in the study, and that included the 3 high schools, Clarksburg, Northwest, Seneca Valley, and all the middle schools that feed those 3 high schools. Okay, this was answered by Kathy. Where can I provide my feedback? So again, I will reiterate it because I know it's an important thing. The survey will be online hopefully by the end of the week. And then in addition to that, again, you have an opportunity to send, email, write, call, board office, board, the superintendent. And then again in the fall, you'll have opportunity once the superintendent makes his recommendation. Because depending on what the option is, you may want to weigh in, you may not want to weigh in. But there will be the opportunity during public hearing to provide your feedback as well. And this was answered. Okay, so, thought I was done. Are middle school commute times considered? Absolutely. So again, when we look at geography, we look at not just middle school commute times, but in this case, it's middle schools and high school, going into high school, but we always consider that. Again, it's about times with kids, how long kids are on the bus. There's operating costs with more buses. So we absolutely consider that, and we showed you some data regarding the travel times for a few of the options. So does the superintendent and the board consider the impact to the students that would need to change schools? Absolutely. The issue, though, is we also have schools that by the end of the 6 years, Clarksburg will be over 800 students overutilized. So there's a decision to be made. Do we have schools that are overutilized, have 800 students, have 20 relocatables, 30 relocatables, Or do we build a new school to accommodate those students, to provide the programs that they need? We are having issues, I can tell you, at the high school level right now, because so many of our high schools are overcrowded. When you have a regular classroom, they can go in a portable. Science can't go in a portable. Gym can't go in a portable. Specialty programs can't go in a portable. And so we are starting to get really tight on high school space and providing our students with what they need and what they want in program offerings with schools that are significantly overutilized. And so there is that balance. And that's just where we are. We are a growing county, and that's just the reality. Can we clarify the middle school assignment for Little Bennett under option 4? Would it still be Rocky Hill? I think the answer is yes. Debbie is just double checking that. Yes, yes, yes. When will the survey be available? By Friday, it will be available. So how is the survey input a benefit if options are not being taken away? So the survey is one area of feedback. So you will see the questions, and I think you'll understand once you see the questions. It will provide us, it will provide the superintendent, it will provide the board information regarding the options that were generated and the factors that are considered and what our stakeholders feel about those options and those factors. So it actually is a very important piece of information. Actually, and this was asked during our community meeting. We will tally up the information. We will provide the board with a succinct summary of the information from the survey, whether it be in a graph form or a pie chart or a written text. But we also will provide every single survey to the board and the superintendent. So we will do the legwork in culling that down for easy reading, but they will have every single survey that is submitted. So they can see exactly who submitted the survey, how the questions were answered by every individual that provides the survey. That answers the survey, I'm sorry. So this question asks, and this is actually the first question that asks about cost for each option, per transportation, faculty, staffing, etc. So I can provide you some information, I can't provide you all. So again, of course, depending on the option, there may be cases where there are additional walkers, and there's some where there are maybe additional bussers, or the busing is further. We don't have that information right now. Staffing, if you think about it, the kids are already here. So the idea is that staff would be reduced by the number of students at one school and would have to go somewhere else in order to accommodate those students. That doesn't mean that every teacher from Northwest will just move automatically to Seneca Valley, but the idea of staffing and cost, kids are already here. We are already teaching these kids in this school year. Of course, as it grows, we will have to get more teachers, but that would be the case whether the kids were here, Clarksburg, or at Seneca Valley. The kids are coming, and so we will have to accommodate them. That being said, it is a little early, but I have no more questions. So thank you everyone for coming. Please look at our website. Watch out for the survey. We will send a Connect Ed when it actually goes up, but just keep looking at it, and thank you for coming.
Let's get a question.
Thank you for addressing all the questions.
You're welcome. Thank you.
You know, what is number 7 doing? I don't quite